Welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Today is a special episode because if you're a property investor or planning to become one, we're going to uncover some shocking new rules that could cost you thousands, something all investors need to know, but we've found many don't know. So I'm going to be chatting with National Director of Property Management, Leanne Jopson, and we're going to talk about some of these new legislative changes. Now, I'm sure you're aware the government's implemented a series of legislative changes. State governments are seeming to change the rules over and over again, the rules of the game for property investors, and while the intention is to protect tenants, they've placed a much greater burden on landlords and property managers alike. We're going to talk about the government interference and some of the legislative changes, some of the burden of compliance, and I bet you didn't know the fines that you could face if your property doesn't meet minimum standards. I'll talk a bit about the rental markets, and we're going to explain what you need to look for in a property manager. Lots to discuss. As I said at the beginning, a pretty important episode, so let's get on with it.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Hi, and welcome to this masterclass where I'm going to have a chat with Leanne Jopson, National Director of Metropole Property Management, to outline some of the changes that have occurred over the last few years that affect property investors. In fact, there have been so many changes that I know some are wondering, is it even worth investing in residential real estate with all the government interference and the changes in legislation? Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Michael.
Now, this has got to be taken in context of the current landscape of property. Over the last couple of years, rents have skyrocketed, related to very low vacancy rates lower than I've seen for decades. And that's because there's a shortage of properties at a time that Australia's population is growing strongly. But now rental growth has slowed a little bit. That doesn't mean rents aren't still going up, but they're not going up as fast. There's still strong demand, but it's currently taking just that little bit longer to rent properties. And it also means that at the moment it's important, as it always has been, to find the right tenants. But Leanne, there's been a lot of government interference recently, hasn't there?
There has indeed. We often talk about it when we're talking about these things. We talk about the rental market in terms of the rents we're achieving and the releasing of properties and those kinds of things. But the legislation is actually changing the way we manage of these and the standards of which we come. So as much as in a lot of instances we focus on in our education of our clients, and we're really focused from a financial point of view of how much rent are we getting and how long those vacancy rates and days on market and that kind of thing. But that is actually only a really small proportion of what the legislation is currently addressing.
So there has been a whole lot of changes. Let's make it clear that each state has got its own set of legislation because residential tenancy is a state-based legislation. Some states are ahead of others. Recently, there's been a bit of news about no-cause evictions. The legislation's changing in many states. What does that really mean? Okay.
So if we go back to 2020 in most states, and again, this is going to be a little bit generalised as we go through, landlords have the ability to serve a no reason notice to vacate, and the length of time changed, but in most cases you gave 120 days no reason notice to vacate, and it's found out vacate. It was plain, simple, end of story.
May want to renovate your property, improve the property, move back into it yourself or sell the property. So, basically property investors want tenants there to pay the rent, but there's lots of reasons why at times you may actually want to get access to your property again. And I think most property investors get offended when they can't get access to their property.
Absolutely. Lots of people are claiming that thing. What do you mean I can't move back into my property? And whilst there were restrictions on if a tenant was on a fixed tenant or renter was on a fixed term tenancy and when that date of repossession coming into play, and there are lots of shorter reasons. So owner to occupier, property to be sold, all of those kinds of things were, around a 60 days notice period, into a fixed term lease with either 90 or 60 days. Those kinds of things were there in place. There was no evidentiary requirements. So you didn't have to prove that you were going to sell the property and you didn't have to prove that you were going to move into it. And if all else failed, you could just serve that. Or if you didn't know, like if you weren't actually sure what you were going to do with the property, you weren't sure whether you were going to renovate it and put it back to the market, you weren't sure whether you were going to sell it, whether you weren't sure of those kinds of things, you could just use this 120-day or no reason or no fault notice to vacate and gain back possession of your property without penalty, without restriction. Subsequent to that, most states and territories within Australia have abolished that. Victoria currently probably has some of the heaviest evidentiary requirements and was one of the first states to change. Queensland has followed suit, and so has a number of other states. We're expecting the same to happen in New South Wales. Potentially what that means is that, so let's look at Victoria as our example. Now, if you wish to renovate a property, so you're getting 60 days notice, property to be renovated outside of a fixed term tenancy, you now have to provide evidentiary documentation that you are actually going to renovate that property and you are ready to go. So that means you've engaged a builder, or you've engaged a tradesperson, or that you've got your permits in place if you up and down walls or that kind of thing. It's now not good enough just to say, hey, I'm going to renovate and that's why I'm giving you 60 days. We now need to say, I'm going to renovate. Here are my plans for that renovation, along with any other permits if I need them. And here is my contractor and the date at which I'm planning on starting. We have to really evidence that that's why we're asking that tenant to leave. It's the same if I'm considering selling property. Now we have to serve a notice to say, hey, I have an intent to sell my property. And then if we're actually going to sell it, we have to send another notice as well, or if it's sold, we have to send another notice. And they have to be evidenced by either a contract of sale or an engagement of your solicitor, so to prepare in Victoria, Section 32, or in everywhere else, a vendor statement, those kinds of things, to actually evidence that you're an authority with a selling agent. You have to evidence what you're actually giving. And that documentation requirement, statutory declarations, witnessing of documents, just to put in your application or just to put in your notice. And then once the notice goes through, if the tenant doesn't vacate, you still have to go back to vacate. So it is a far more complex. And if any of those points of evidence are incorrect, or you've used the wrong term or the wrong section, that's it. You go back to the start again. So it is a far more detailed and litigious process.
That's just one of the many factors that have changed. There's also been a change in how often you can increase rents. Now, we know a particular political party with a colour in its name has actually proposed legislation that you couldn't increase rents to more than a particular amount or at all. But what have been the changes in how often you can increase rents?
Well, again, the baseline in just about all states and territories across Australia now is that you can only increase the rents once every 12 months. Now, there's a couple of little things that I'm going to put asterisks on. In states like Victoria, again, it is now legal, that a compulsory requirement that you can provide the tenant evidence of the fact that the rent increase that you are asking is market rent or appropriate market rent. So what that means is we have to do comparative market analysis, and we have to show that our properties have let or are let at the rate that we're asking for this property to go up to, which means we are following the market rather than, unless something has let in that block at that time, right now on the market this week, we're effectively following those results. So your rental increases as they come up are sitting at, whereas the forward is always pushed for above.
So we could be market leaders, and that's one of the things I know you and your team at Metropole are wanting to do. Maximising the rents is not the only way we help our clients get the best results. There's lots of other things, and hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss that. But it's actually making it much more difficult to maximise rents, number one. And also it actually takes a lot more time, effort and work from property managers. And I think what I'm noticing is that tenants are pushing back, they're complaining. And you can understand when rents are growing at double-digit growth, but they don't see the other side of the equation, that outgoings are increasing as well.
Absolutely. And I think that there's, once upon a time, it is true that the property manager had a great deal of knowledge. The landlord had a great deal of knowledge. With all of these changes, the property managers have the knowledge, but it hasn't yet disseminated through to our landlords and our property owners. However, the government is doing its very best to communicate to tenants what their rights are. And that's obviously a political move. Michael, we were discussing earlier this week how the New South Wales government has actually set up a regional task force. It's going to be the largest number of employees in a task force with fair trading. Victoria has also sent up a regional task force that's going to look specifically at enforcing minimum standards and compliance issues. And of course, in Queensland, we're also looking at whether they've introduced penalties. We've got a situation where we're waiting to the next lot of legislation, but they've now put through legislation that actually attaches rental increases to the property. In addition to that, all of the bond authorities and fair trade, consumer affairs, residential tenancies as authorities, the various states, get agencies that they now directly communicating with tenants to make sure that tenants are aware of their new rights and responsibilities. So it's becoming a case where every tenant is better educated and in fact encouraged to put forward, their claims, to a task force, to those kinds of things. So we can't hope that the tenant isn't going to realise that their options have changed. They know, and they're being actively told that their options are changing.
Now, a moment ago, you mentioned that in Queensland, rental increases are attached to a property rather than a tenant. What does that mean for me as a property investor in Queensland?
So it means you need a really smart property manager and one that's ready to, I hate the word, but pivot yet again, right? So as you know, for a long time, and just as we were talking about before, we've really pushed at Metropole what that market rent is. And we really wanted to be leading in where our rents were, albeit a calculated risk that we're doing, because we don't want to push that when having the property vacant or reletting or rest of it wasn't great for us. Like, it's not great overall for those vacancy periods as a letting piece for our clients. We are very, very conscious of that cash flow and yield figure that's there. As much as we're about equity and in growing the value, we are still conscious that everybody needs to pay bills. But we used to have a two-pronged approach where we would actively encourage fixed-term tenancies at a higher rental, right? And that's what we were aiming for. So we're maximising rent, minimising vacancy. It's what everybody wants. When we return the property to market, we always went a little bit above that. So if the tenant did vacate for whatever reason, we looked at what was there and we always added on a little bit to see if we could just push that figure a little bit more, just push it up. Now, under the Residential Tenancies Act in Queensland, this is specific to Queensland, the rents can only go up once every 12 months. These are attached to the property. So if you've put your rate up in August, right, you've put your rent up in August, your tenant's on a periodic tenancy and your tenant vacates as per normal. They've been there 4 years with steady rate increases every August. Last time they didn't sign on to a new fixed term tenancy, but essentially they vacate, they were paying $600 a week. We do a market assessment and say, hey, we'd like to try for $620. We no longer can do that because the last rent increase came in August or the 1st of August or whatever it was. We cannot increase the rate again until next August. So we're having to return properties to the market at the current rate or whatever rent that was charged in the last 12 months. If there hasn't been a rent increase in the last 12 months, we can increase it. But if there has, and in the vast majority of cases, and you just say all of our rents increased in the last 12 months, we've fixed it at our price. Now, there's lots of interesting ways to get around that. So at the moment, we're doing that on a case-by-case example. I've had discussions with our landlords about the idea of offering a 15-month lease, so there's 3 months left to run before the rent was being increased. We actually decided we've got to get a higher rent with a little clause in there that says that the first 3 months we're offering a 15-month lease. The first 3 months will be at this rate, and then the next 12 months will be at that rate. That will get the better benefit of the longevity of a tenancy, because most long-term tenants don't want to move in for 3 or 6 months and not know what the rent's going to go to. So they get the benefit while still applying with the law. Now, that is complying with the law. Now, that's really case by case situation kind of thing as we go through and working out those best options.
Now, one of the things that's changed for landlords is what's called minimum rental standards. Now, we don't advocate being a slum landlord, but this minimal rental standards, which I believe is important to give tenants correct accommodation, has made a lot more work for property managers and for landlords. All the compliance, time, cost issues, documentation. Maybe you could explain a bit about this.
Sure. Again, this differs in each state. Whilst Sydney or New South Wales has the most serious task force and funding behind it, probably it has the least of the minimum standard at the moment. I mean, we'll circle back to that in probably another 3 months' time when we start hearing the New South Wales government talk about theirs. But in both Queensland and Victoria now, we have extensive minimum standards. Now, there is a difference between minimum standards and compliance. So, again, in Victoria, you must have had compliance, so electrical compliance and gas compliance checks undertaken. And that's to ensure that those elements, your electrical supply and your gas supply, is compliant with the Australian Building Standards, Australian Building Safety Standards. So that's part of that. But the minimum standards are something that are different again. So the minimum standards are things that look at, do your doors have the correct locks? Is there enough distance between the top of the burner in the kitchen and the cabinetry at the top? Do you have window locks, door locks? Do you have adequate drainage? Do you have adequate ventilation? Now in Victoria, we're hearing about the next phase will be, do you have adequate insulation? Are there mould issues? There's about 14 key ones that are there in Victoria. For those people that are in Queensland, we've had some minimum standards come into effect. The last phase of those come in 1st of September. October in Victoria and 1st of September in Queensland. So there's a range of those things, heating and cooling requirements. So in Melbourne at the moment, heating is required in the main living area. What is currently proposed, the documentation is just closed at the end of July for that. We're waiting for the announcements in October for what will be the next phase of minimum standard, as things like, and we don't know these yet, so no panic until I've done another webinar for our Victorian client. But essentially what we're looking at is there will now be minimum standards for cooling. There'll be no efficiency ratings on hot water systems and that kind of thing. And I guess across Australia, what we also need to be preparing everybody for is there is going to be a phase out of gas and the introduction of electric across all of the property as Australia aims to achieve its green targets and its carbon emission targets. So it's so much more than the good old-fashioned collecting rent. It's so much more than doing your normal, has the tenant paid, are they keeping the property in good order? There is so much more that we need to monitor. In Victoria, again, you've got disclosure statements that a landlord must sign, the duty of care that our landlords in all 3 states that we actively working are becoming increasingly legislated, increasingly documented. We have to be able also decided now that we have to be able to provide tenants and renters, depending on which state you're in, with this documentation within 14 days. Right? If we've got a request, we actually not only just have to say, yes, it's all done, we have to prove that it's done, and there's penalties if we don't.
What this means is a lot more requirements on landlords, but also on property managers. By the way, there's been other things as well, all those local taxes, land tax changes in a number of states, Airbnb tax, other increases as well. But I know that we look after, a very large number of properties throughout Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane for investors. And I've noticed the changes over the last years in property management. I remember during COVID, 30% of property managers left the industry. It was just too hard to cope during those challenging times. But it seems now even more property managers are leaving. They're finding it's a continual conveyor belt of complaints from both landlords and tenants. I know those who are staying in the industry are demanding significantly higher wages to make up for the stress of all this. They're feeling the pressure of, I guess, continuously delivering bad news for our tenants and also for landlords, because most landlords, rental providers, are finding this continual change a challenge. And I guess that goes back to where I was starting a while ago, wondering, is it even worth staying in property? Now, I'll give an answer to that in a minute, but I think most people would recognise, I believe it is. For those who stay in, they're going to get really good returns. But there are a lot of challenges out there. How are you finding the property management industry? What's the big changes there?
As you know, I own property as well, and I must say that I'm finding the changes as a landlord and residential rental provider, because I own properties in a couple of different states as well, so I get both titles. I'm finding it difficult myself. Like, my interest rates have gone up, my restrictions on night stays for your Airbnbs, all of those kinds of things have all changed. And, the question that most property owners is, as you just said, is it worth me keeping my investment? Well, think about that. Yes, at Metropole, we are 7 to 80 times more likely to have multi-property owners. If you're a Metropole client, you're going to be a property investor. But the truth is, most of us don't have more than 10. You're the exception, or just like most of us don't have more than 10 investment properties. You think about that as a property manager. If it's really difficult for you to cope with the changes and the challenges of everything that's going on with your 10 investment properties, and you've got somebody managing with them, imagine what that's like for a property manager who, in our case, now has, we've capped all of our portfolios so they've all got less than 150 properties under management, and that's something that we've changed and will continue to bring down and monitor, because it's just impossible to be able to comply with all of these new compliance requirements, monitor all of the minimum standards, deal with an ever-increasing education program for landlords, residential providers, tenants who also see things in the media, other steps, and think that is their right as well, and the confusion and conflict that is there. Because once upon a time, a tenant in Victoria, and never seen on the national news that there's now this new rental phase in Queensland. So it's social media and the media in general has affected that playing field. So if you're a landlord that's lucky enough to own 10 properties and you're finding it confronting dealing with all these issues, imagine being a property manager with 120 or 130 properties and facing all of those issues from both sides and having to balance that out, particularly when your heart and soul and the property manager says, this isn't fair, right? How is it fair that my landlord, who's really great and has almost taken care of his tenant, now all of a sudden needs to start paying for all of these extra things, especially when some of our long-term tenants don't want them.
Yeah.
Right.
So interestingly, I'm going to give a shameless plug for your team at Metropole Property Management, because I know you spent a lot of time educating the property managers, getting the right people there. We've had to pay considerably more to keep the right people. And so just like in many other industries, there are a number of tiers. The average property manager has all got these challenges, but many work as part of a general real estate sales agency. And I think a question investors should ask is my property manager really up to date? Do they have a department that specialises in this and keeps them up to date? And how will it affect me if they're not up to date? Because I think many property investors are feeling they're losing control. Yes, they've got the cash flow concerns and depletion of their financial buffers, but all these new compliance requirements, the legislative requirements, and we've only touched on some of them, and the increased complexity of the residential tenancy legislation puts an obligation on the landlord, on the residential provider. And the reason we're using those two different terms, for those who don't understand, is different states have different names for those people who provide residential tenancies. But on the one hand, it puts extra responsibility on the landlord, but it also does on the property manager. They have a responsibility and they can have serious consequences if they're not up to date.
Exactly. So we were talking about this only last week, Michael, where with the new task force in Victoria and the latest changes to that legislation, yes, now they've introduced task force to enforce the minimum standards. A failure to meet, if found not to meet the minimum standards for an individual landlord, that can be an hour of fines of just over $11,000. For a company or corporation, it's just over $57,000. Right. But what's really scary in Victoria, and I'll talk a little bit to more of this as well, what's really scary in Victoria for a property manager is that now there is the introduction of the concept that if a property manager knowingly manages a property that does not meet the minimum standards, that they can be charged criminally. Right. That is a really big risk. If you If you are a property manager, like, don't get me wrong, Michael, is a big risk for our landlords in terms of, potentially being fined thousands of dollars if their property isn't compliant, or corporations tens of thousands of dollars. But also for an individual property manager, like all of a sudden I go to work and I could be charged with a criminal offence and I'm alone with 2 or 3 kids and, I've had to be working in the industry 20 years. That's really scary, right? There's very few people that have that as a shadow or a cloud hanging over them when they go to work each day. So those kinds of things that, really do affect where we're at kind of thing. So it is very much everybody on the same team because it has major consequences, not just financially, but can have major financially pressures the rest of our tenure. Because if we are charged criminally, even if it's a minor rap over the knuckles, it can be a loss of our licenses.
I know that you and the team of Metropole have been taking some proactive measures. What have you done differently over the last little while? How have things changed based on all these things we've already discussed?
Couple of things. We are actively changing some of our structures at Metropole so that we kind of reduce our portfolio sizes so that our teams simply have more time to deal with these requirements. We're expanding our administration team and working on some technological aspects there, more portals, more instant notifications and reporting coming in, because we have that obligation to report back to the tenant if requested. So we're working on tech, we're working on extra people, we're reducing our portfolio sizes to give that. Many of our owners may have noticed that we've also had, and we're going to continue to have more of these. I'm sorry, the team are in training today or won't be available this afternoon, or all those kinds of things, because the amount of training that we are needing to do is astronomical. In addition to that, some of this, so the legislation in Victoria, the feedback has only just closed in July for the next lot that's going to be announced in October. We are spending so much more time petitioning, writing, time with the various REIs, the real estate institutes in each state, to have our input and put our voice forward on behalf of our clients in regard to this. There's all of the training camps, think tank groups that everybody is participating in to try and plot our way through what is a never-ending and constantly changing environment. Couple that with what is normally, which is already a difficult job, it's quite a challenge and it's time-consuming. The reason that we're having to reduce those portfolio sizes is because we are seeing that because of the complexities of the situations that we're dealing with, we have to spend more time on them. Something that was really simple. Hey, we've done an assessment. We think your rent should go up $20 a week now, right? Something that we could tell just from pure being on the ground and doing that. We now spend an hour to an hour and a half on simply finding the evidence that we need, let alone formatting it and having the discussions that we need to be able to do that. So it's just the time component, and we need to dedicate more time there. We'll have more information on that coming out, so that the variant 5 was a little bit more space-based at how we've had to adapt that to ensure that our staff are going to have the time that is required, and it is time to go through. Because a day, just as I was talking about earlier, with the individual things about are we going to offer a 15-month lease or a 16-month lease, or do we perhaps only offer an 11-month lease, depending on those rate increases to maximise those yields, is a far more individual approach. And you need only put one thing wrong on one of those entry documents, locate the date in the wrong spot, or voted in the wrong spot, copy of that section in the wrong spot, and it will invalidate that notice. So the need for data checking is also paramount now.
I know you also got new onboarding techniques for new properties, checklists to make sure properties comply with minimum standards, and also you being much more careful, if that's even possible, considering the systems we had in place, to make sure that tenants are going to be the right tenants too. Now, this is not a judge of people, but you don't want to end up with people who are going to create problems. Now, there's no doubt that good tenants sometimes become bad tenants. Family circumstances, illnesses, health creates issues as well. But if you can get it all right up front, that makes a difference. And I think the other big thing I've noticed that you are doing for clients of Metropole is more education articles, webinars, in-house training, regular updates on legislative changes. So it really has been a significant change, the most significant years of change that I've seen in the industry since Metropole Property Management started way back in the year 2001 or 2002. This extra tenant screening. Now, in the past, tenants were able to put their details on a particular platform and didn't have to give us all their personal information because it was on, I think it was realestate.com's platform or something like that. There's been some changes there, hasn't there?
Yeah. So some of these are proposed changes, but there's been in those industry groups that we're talking about, very little rebuttal of these things. And there are some current changes that have already come into place. So if you're in Victoria, we have lots of restrictions around asking for people's age, occupation, all of those kinds of things.
That's always surprised me that you're not allowed to ask their occupation when you're offering your $1 million asset to them.
We could do another 10-hour podcast on applications alone, and you know that I could do that literally. Essentially, yes, we've got these rules around those kinds of things which are Privacy Act orientated and discrimination. Basically, essentially, how somebody was born or what they do for a living shouldn't be taken into consideration when they're applying for a property. The powers that believe that if you have the ability to pay for a property and, you're going to comply with the law is the law, right? So in part, yes, I get it, right? We know that we shouldn't be discriminating against marital status or sexual orientation, gender, all of those kinds of things. So it does go down a little bit of the path about then why then would you discriminate about occupation? It really should be about the ability to pay. So there's some interesting things about what we can and can't ask. That doesn't mean that people can't volunteer that information. So that's where you have to change your processes and your application forms. You can't ask it on an application form, but there's a lot that you can garner from having a simple conversation with people. Sure. Again, once upon a time, we loved all of these new apps because we got greater detail. They were faster. We could process things automatically. And we went down that path and it was fantastic because it reduced, again, the vacancy rates, how quick them to get people in, how much information in our vetting processes. Now it's almost reversing that because we've got limited information that we can get through those purposes. So it comes back to having that hands-on approach, which of course takes more time. If we need more specialised leasing staff or specialised inspection staff that have the time to do that, because again, it's come down to those complexities as we work through. In addition to that, we have, so that's one side, the Privacy Act side. On the other side, we also have data security and safety. Right? We have all seen massive breaches across major corporations. Probably everybody that's listening to this has been affected in some way or knows somebody that's been affected. So one of the other things that has been put forward is that there should be a way in which people can apply for a property where they are not required to put their personal details onto a third-party platform. In other words, we go back to paper applications. So the whole idea is that I can come into Metropole and apply for a property without having to have my data uploaded through a third party. Right. Now, again, that one is in its final stages. I do understand it, as in there's a lot of really big impacts as a result of data breaches. But again, it comes back to that personal effect. And again, with that data still needs to be stored somewhere. As you know, Michael, we've spent a large amount protecting our clients' data and security because we do hold a lot of data and security and contact details and all of that kind of stuff. And so we have been able to increase that over the last the number of years. I'm not sure that all real estate agents do that. And so I do understand why people would have a fear surrounding that.
There's other things you've been doing as well. I know that there has been different ways we inspect properties, that every property inspection now requires more time and effort. But at Metropole, you introduced a while ago 3D cameras so that our property investor clients, our landlords, are able to actually walk through their property and see what's going on. The 3D inspections have been fantastic. And I know every time there are inspections, there's more requirement for the property manager to look at the property and make sure all the minimum requirements are kept. So regular inspections are critical. And again, if I may give a shameless plug, at Metropole, we help our clients build their wealth. First of all, starting with strategic advice, but then the ongoing management of it's important as well. We have specialist property managers, and in the past, people used to say, "Oh, how often do I get my rent, and how are you going to make sure that I get the maximum rent?" That's important, but I think what we've been talking about today shows that property management in 2024 or 25 moving forward now is going to be much, much more than rental collection or finding a good tenant, Leanne.
Absolutely. You know, our checklists used to be 10 points long. Our checklist in some cases is now 300 points long because there's so much more detail required. The 360 cameras are amazing. I'm looking forward to the next advancement in that, where we're looking at being able to use AI and be able to do side-by-side comparisons. That's still in the testing phase at the moment, but that also takes out the personal opinion of things as well, which is another really tricky one when we're talking about on claims. And, you know, one of the other things that's happening is portable bonds. That's another subject for a different day as well. But that's really taking out that this is what it looks like now. This is the AI comparison to what it looks like now and what is fair and reasonable. And that's becoming more and more challenging.
What it was in my mind when I asked you to have this chat was to make the invisible visible, because most investors don't understand what's going on. Yes, they know there are some changes, but they get their rent in their bank account regularly and they get a couple of inspection reports a year. So I think what I'm trying to bring out is the difference a dedicated property management company can make, because the long-term success for your investment property and its potential capital growth is maximised through, in my mind, it's maximised through proactive property management. So if you're a landlord at Metropole at the moment, thank you for trusting us. If you're watching this or listening to this podcast and you're a property investor, why not find out the difference a dedicated property management company can make to your investment returns? I'll leave a link in the show notes for those who are listening to this as a podcast, where you can have a chat with Leanne Jopson to see, are you getting the maximum rent, and are you being covered for all these issues that could crop up and bite you in the backside? But I guess the first question I asked at the beginning of this, Leanne, was, is it still worth investing in residential real estate? And sure, the landscape's changing, but as I said a moment ago, those who stay in the market are going to benefit from the rising rents, because at the moment there are over 7 million Australians who are in rental property accommodation. And it's not just because they're poor or can't afford to buy. A lot of tenants are there because of their lifestyle. They're just getting married, just got divorced, they've just moved out of house, they've moved to a new state, they've moved to a new country. So therefore, I think it's important to remember that the sort of property you own should be attractive to a wide range of tenants, but in my mind, to affluent tenants. And there's been a number of studies showing that more and more affluent people are renting, because if you think about it, your future rental income is going to be dependent upon your tenant's ability to keep paying rent and keep paying increasing rent in the future. So owning the right property is important, and then managing your multi-million-dollar assets is important. So I guess the point of our discussion today, Leanne, was There's lots of changes, and yes, they're not necessarily in favour of the landlord, so have somebody on your side looking after your interest, and that's what Metropole do. Your team is committed to protecting our landlord's investment, and if you're not sure about any of this, I'll leave a link in the show notes to have a chat with Leanne Jopson about this, and let's see what having a dedicated property management department could do for your investments. Thank you very much for your time, Leanne.
Thank you, Michael.
As I said at the beginning of the show, boy, are there changes afoot that property investors need to be aware of, and the importance of having a great team around you. Well, I guess it's more important than ever. Now, if you got some benefits from today's show and you're not currently a subscriber, please stop for a sec before we do the next segment, and on whatever podcast app you're listening to this or on YouTube, just click the subscribe button so twice a week you get the information from my guests and me. By the way, if you are interested in your future, I also suggest that you subscribe to my separate podcast that I run once a week with Simon Kirstenmacher, one of Australia's leading demographers, that we call Demographics Decoded. That's going to help you unveil the trends shaping your future, really important for property investors, business people, entrepreneurs. Again, wherever you're listening to this podcast app, please stop and subscribe to Demographics Decoded. It's only a reasonably new show. We've only been doing it for a few weeks now, but boy, is the audience growing significantly, and we've had great feedback. Now, part of the chat we just had with Leanne Jopson has shown you the importance of having a property team around you. Not every property manager has got the facilities, the backup of a company that can help you. Now, they can collect rents, but are they really up to date with all this legislation? I hope you recognise that at Metropole, we specialise in helping Australians achieve financial freedom, and it starts with strategic property and wealth advice. And whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting in your journey, we'd love to help you by putting together a strategic plan. So we put together personalised plans. We've got deep market knowledge. And as I think you could see after our chat today, we really have an end-to-end service. We offer a complete range of service, including finance, wealth advisory, property acquisition, but we're much, much more than the buyer's agent. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but we're still small enough to care, and we're involved in property developments, construction, and as you heard from Leanne today, property management. If you want to outperform the average by having a comprehensive team on your side that gives you a holistic approach to property and wealth and finance, go to metropole.com.au. I'd love to be part of your ongoing wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
My mindset message today is going to be short and sweet because we've just had a long session already, but we're going to talk about how to take advantage of that lucky break. I remember reading that the legendary chess champion Garry Kasparov had a brilliant quote on luck. He said, "The phrase 'it's better to be lucky than good' must be one of the most ridiculous homilies ever uttered." Garry said, "In nearly any competitive endeavour, you've got to be damn good before luck can be of any use to you at all." And I agree with that. I mean, luck's floating around everywhere, but the ability to capitalise on it is rare. Now, I love the idea that there are probably 4 different types of luck. Blind luck, truly random occurrences. Luck from motion, and that's created through hustle, through movement and collisions, things that you're doing to put yourself in a lucky position. Luck from awareness, created through specific skills that make it easier for you to spot those lucky events when other people can't. And luck from uniqueness. That's luck that's created through a unique combination of skills that attract luck to you. But I guess the central point of what I want to mention to you today is you may not be able to control which of those types of luck you encounter, but you certainly can be prepared to take advantage of it. So my message to you today is only the skilled are ready for their luck. So back to the initial quote, better to be lucky than good. No, get damn good, as Gary Kasparov says, and then luck will find you. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. Hey, but before you move on to the next podcast you're hoping to listen to, please let me remind you that I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher that we call Demographics Decoded, where we unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. This is a must-listen-to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, business or entrepreneurship. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, please stop for a second and subscribe on your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. Now, if you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody else who'd benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Or just talk to them, tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour. You're definitely going to be doing me a favour in helping in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, you can catch up with me in between these shows on social media, or you can join my private Facebook group. Just go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I've got a special bonus for you to say thank you for subscribing. Just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There's a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. That's my way of saying thank you to you for taking the time to listen. Oh, by the way, if you haven't listened to the many podcast episodes we've already got, we're well into our 600s of episodes now. You can always listen to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?